Kia ora koutou, welcome to this video about the art behind Red Dust Rebellion. Now the thing about art and board games is they shouldn't just be pretty pictures that capture the eye, they should be there to tell a story. And one of the things with Red Dust Rebellion is I'm trying to tell a story about this imagined conflict on Mars 200 years from now. And one of the best ways to get across the ideas and the concepts of the setting and the world building behind it is the art. The art needs to tell a story, and each piece of art needs to contribute a little bit to building the world that is Red Dust Rebellion. And they took that on board and they sought out an amazing artist. So his name is Marcos and he's from Brazil, and here's his DeviantArt page behind me, and I'll link to that in the description below. Definitely go check out his stuff, he's absolutely amazing, and he's helped bring the world of Red Dust Rebellion to life. Now very quickly I'm going to run through our process, and how that goes is I write a very short description of what I want the art to look like, what I want it to say, and how I want it composed. And I've put up an example behind me here of a picture that this is how I saw it in my mind, and this is the direction I gave to Marcos. He then goes away and sketches that up and sends us back a sketch image like the one up here. And the crew at GMT and myself, we look at that, we offer feedback, and then he goes away and works on the final version. And then we get a final piece of art that looks like this. And this bit of art is the Red Wednesday riots. Now that's a very important event in the mythology of Red Dust Rebellion. It's the bloodiest day of riots in the history of Mars. And I wanted this to depict a security force member just brutally stomping on a protester. I wanted this to be a really visceral, powerful image of state oppression. And I think Marcos captured that really well. Now I'm going to run through another 15 images and just tell you how they build the world of Red Dust Rebellion. We're going to have 48 of these in the end, so I'm going to do another 2 videos like this as the art comes in. But this is the first 16. This picture is corporate militarization, and you've likely seen this one before, as it's the one we're tentatively using as cover art. And this one was all about showing the force of the corporations, that they are well armed, well prepared, and intimidating. And here they are standing in front of a group of protesters, and they just look menacing. And that's what we wanted to capture here. The inside look of a city within Red Dust, the closed Martian cities, and how tight and cramped they are and dirty they are, and this brutal corporate security guards just locking things down. And while most of our interior shots are quite dark and claustrophobic, we wanted the outside of Mars, the external shots, to have a very different feel. And this card is Sudden Storm. One of the features of Mars is its dust storms, and there are a lot of mechanics in the game that represent the ongoing storms, but this is an event card that throws up a sudden storm that can just obliterate a force that's out in the deserts. And we just wanted the art on this card to show just how rapid, dangerous, and scary the dust storms on Mars can be. Next up we have the Tombs of Mars, which is a card about all of these attempts at colonization and building bases that have failed across Mars. So we're 200 odd years into Martian colonization here, and not everything worked out. Some sites turned out to be not fit for purpose, or were abandoned, or the people from there moved to another one, or a disaster happened and they were wiped out. So there's these bases and temporary stations all over the planet that are somewhat abandoned. And when a rebellion happens, these stations can get repurposed or reinvigorated and used as secret bases for the rebels. In the foreground there you have one of the reclaimers, that's the guy with the staff. And they're the eco-terrorist group within Red Dust Rebellion. And you'll see these guys pop up in a lot of the external art. Next up is the bombing of MacLeod 77. And one of the things I want to do with Red Dust Rebellion was not make the events generic. There's going to be some generic events to cover sort of wider concepts, but I wanted to have specific events within the story because other coin games focus on specific events that happen in their histories, and I wanted this to feel like a real history. So the bombing of MacLeod 77, a terrorist attack on a busy maglev that blew that up and killed a whole bunch of people. I wanted that to be an important event in the story, and this card shows the aftermath of that event. And that's the thing with world building. I could have called this card Maglevs, and it could have had an effect on Maglevs being good for one side and bad for another, but making it a specific bombing incident and then providing a backstory about that terrorist attack in the world book, I'm trying to build a more fully realized, fleshed out kind of environment. And it's also much more memorable Maglevs or the bombing of Maglev 77? Which one are you going to remember when you're playing the game? Next we have a fantastic wide angle shot, and there's a reclaimer in the foreground here looking at this giant greenhouse gas emission creating plant. So to terraform Mars, you need to pump a whole bunch of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. You also need to fix Mars's magnetic field, but that's a different story. That has been resolved in the game, but it's not covered in this picture. And these plants are what the corporation's building out in the deserts of Mars to pump all those greenhouse gases into the environment to make the planet ready for terraforming. And that's one of their goals. And I just wanted to show the sort of scale and scope of just how big these terraforming projects are. And that reclaimer in the foreground really puts this into scale. This is a massive, massive station being built here. Here's one of the more quirky cards. It's targeting cyclists. Now, a cyclist is someone who comes to visit Mars on the Aldrin Cycler. And the Aldrin Cycler is a set of, it's quite a complex thing to explain, but you can slingshot a rocket around Earth and then use the gravitational swing to swing it back around Mars, and it goes in a sort of figure 8. And you can use very little energy and keep that going pretty much constantly, and that's an Aldrin Cycler. And part of the Red Dust Rebellion lore is that these cyclers, which go back and forth around every 90 days, is the most common way to get stuff to and from Mars. Like, you can get there at a different speed with rockets and stuff if you want to go on a different timetable, but the cyclers keep going. So tourists, people who jump on one of these things, take the 90-day trip to Mars, then spend, say, a couple of months there holidaying, are known as cyclists. And the idea of targeting cyclists, this card can go one of two ways. First, it can go that they're being targeted by the corporations and the government to spend their big tourist dollars here, or they can be targeted by the terrorists, which, you know, does PR damage. And I just wanted this to be a sort of quirky, here's some rich folk from Earth, and here's some other people from Mars kind of looking at them like, where the hell are these people from? And it's targeting cyclists. It's an unusual card, but I think you need these sort of personable cards in the deck to sort of flesh out the world and make it feel more lived in and more real. A lot of buildings are cool, a lot of events are cool, but people are what make the story. This card is Bicentennial Day, and this is heavily inspired by the events of 2020. So Bicentennial Day, the 200-year anniversary of the first colony on Mars, and there's a big astronaut statue there, and the locals are tearing it down. And this is all about that destroying colonizer mythology idea of, you put up statues, you venerate certain people, and those people might end up not being particularly great people. So you tear the statues down in protest. And that's the idea of the Bicentennial Day is a flashpoint in the Red Dust Rebellion story. It's 200 years of humans living on Mars, but it's also a chance for Martians to go, hey, we've got 200 years of heritage here. How about we start being Martians and stop being Earthers? And so yeah, it becomes a flashpoint of emotion for the Martian independence movement, and manifest in a series of riots and the defacing of statues. I really love the scale of the statue here as well. I just really think it's this big statue and they're just fucking pulling the damn thing down. I really love Marcos's work here. It's wonderful. It's one of my favorite cards. Next up is the Red Dahlia, and as part of the world building, you've got to chuck in little factions and little historical figures, and the Red Dahlia is a terrorist who was responsible for a bunch of bombings early in the Martian revolts, and they were never caught, but they would always leave the spray painted symbol of the Dahlia near the explosions. And I wanted to capture the idea of someone, detonating one of those things, like the chaos of a bomber operating up close, the spray paint, the sort of, you don't know who this person is. And it's really so you've got this famous figure that, is part of the mythology, a Scarlet Pimpernel type person. But in the case of the Martian revolts and the Martian rebellions, it's the Red Dahlia, the first person to go, I'm going to blow up a whole bunch of corporate places. I'm going to really take it to the corporations and the Martian provisional government, and they never catch me. Next up, we have our first space card. So the cards so far go into sort of interior ones and exterior ones on Mars, but we have the occasional card that shows space, and this is USS Challenger, which is the United States flagship. Now, the Earth government doesn't play a direct role in Red Dust Rebellion. EarthGov is not a player. The two coin players are the Martian Provisional Government and the corporations, and EarthGov's controlled by whoever has the most favor with Earth at that time. But EarthGov troops are really strong. And the idea behind this card was the Challenger turns up. It's loaded with Marines and other equipment, and that's just an immediate boost for the corporations or the Martian Provisional Government, whoever's controlling EarthGov, just take those troops and be able to redeploy them straight away. Conversely, the Challenger could leave, taking a whole bunch of troops and resources with them for another mission somewhere else, maybe on Luna, maybe back to Earth. And I just wanted the Challenger to look really badass. I just, I love sci-fi ships. I love the ships from Babylon 5. I love the ships from Star Wars and Star Trek. Having my own ship, how cool is that? And yeah, I just really love the silhouette here. It's brutalist, and I think that's really cool. This is New Cordoba. This is like the central business district of one of the big cities on Mars. So there are 6 major cities on Mars, and New Cordoba is one of it. And it originally started off as a landing site for a pan-Arab settlement. So this is originally one funded by the Saudis, and at that point it was very much a Saudi-controlled sort of settlement. But in my setting, 200 years on from now, Saudi Arabia isn't run by a kingdom. There's been mass liberalization across the Middle East, and New Cordoba represents quite a diverse melting pot of belief and diversity. So that's why in this shot we show a mosque and we show a church sitting side by side in this New Cordoba city. Because one of the things I didn't want to do with Red Dust Rebellion was have like the same sort of, the terrorists are Islamic, because there's a lot of real world games that do that. I wanted to have my rebels be something different. So I thought this was a nice way to say 200 years from now, maybe we won't be fighting over Christianity and Islam, It's a nice thought. But anyway, back to the picture. And for me, this is the hustle and bustle of a big Martian underground city. Now, here's something else I didn't mention earlier. All cities on Mars are subterranean in my setting. There might be some surface features and some surface functions, but the core of the city sits underground, and that's because Mars has a thin atmosphere, radiation is really nasty, and the best way to deal with that is to cover yourself in lots and lots of dirt. That means a lot of the sites on Mars are going to be underground. Like the whole glass dome thing, that's really cool for like science fiction, but it's really freaking impractical, especially with that light atmosphere. If it's a meteorite, it's just going to come straight through. So my setting, the cities are underground, they're subterranean, which gives that claustrophobic feeling as well, and the idea that any conflict in a subterranean city is going to be, it's like fighting in a subway. Like, just imagine a big metropolitan subway, times that by 50, and then have soldiers running through it. That's kind of the feeling I wanted to go for. But this is the heart of New Cordoba. So it's big, it's bright, it's a big open underground dome, and it's just a really inviting, characterful looking city. Next up is the 24.67 hour news cycle, a card named because Mars's day is slightly longer than Earth's, so we never quite sync up. There's like an extra 40 odd minutes of time on Mars for a day, so it's 24 hours, 40 minutes, I think, so about that kind of ballpark. But the idea for this was that 200 years from now, you think you get ads everywhere, you think you get advertising everywhere. Can you imagine 200 years more time what companies will be able to do? There'll be marketing everywhere. You'll have your personalized feed. It'll feed news to you. You'll go anywhere. You'll be just hooked on to information and news tailored exactly to your specific requirements. And that's the kind of vibe I wanted to get here. This is also an opportunity to bring in some of the cyber into what's essentially a cyberpunk game. But you might notice that this game so far is a lot less cyber than most cyberpunk games and a lot more punk. Like I really wanted the punk, the grittiness, the brutality of the setting to come to the fore, more than the shiny chrome and toys, which seems to be where a lot of cyberpunk ends up these days. But this is a good example of the setting being a cyberpunk setting. Next up we have Hammer the Machines, and this introduces one of the foundation characters for Red Dust Rebellion. So there's a character for each of the factions, and this one here is Araha. She's the leader of the mining guild and one of the primary figures in the Red Dust movement. And here she is leading a revolt against mining robots that were brought in as scab labor to replace miners by one of the corporations. And the miners, what do? They picked up their sledgehammers and they hammered the machines. And this is, I think, one of those really nice sort of evocative, almost propaganda picture, poster sort of pictures that you could see this kind of image put on a thing saying they won't take our jobs, we'll smash their machines, that kind of stuff. And I just really wanted the strong Mari Wahine to represent the sort of the more noble aspects of Red Dust, because Red Dust is fundamentally a workers' movement, it's a social movement, and that's a good thing. But they're also part of their aspects, like the Red Dahlia, they're bombers, they're terrorists as well. And that's the nuanced thing about doing a coin game, is no faction is lily white and no faction is pure dark. You have a movement like Red Dust, which is about workers' rights. It's about self-determination, but they also blow up trains. So, you've got to balance the whole movement, because the movement's made up of individuals. Some of those individuals are doing things for the good. Araha really represents the sort of the better aspects of Red Dust, but there are also, more negative aspects represented more by the Red Dahlia. Anyway, I really like this shot. I think it's a really neat picture, and really, really pleased with how this one turned out. The Rodgers line is an interesting card. If you've played a coin game, there are things called lines of communication, and they're sort of fast movement things and supply lines. They generate income, and you've also got to defend them. So they're like really important roads. We kind of did away with that largely in Red Dust Rebellion, focusing instead on the Aldrin Cycler being where you get most of your logistics support from. But we do have the maglevs, which allow fast movement between the cities on Mars. But one of those maglev lines isn't in play at the start of the game, and that's the Rodgers line between Europa Dome and Tereshkova Dome. And that line can only come on if you play this card for its benefit. So you're effectively altering the board by adding this extra maglev line, connecting two domes and making them just that much closer. And I just really like the idea of adding a line of communication, or adding this extra line to the board that, you go, okay, now these two things are adjacent that weren't adjacent at some point, when you started the game. And I just wanted to show that the reason it's been delayed is because of labor action, because of kickbacks, because of, lowest bidder stuff. So it's being built, but, when will it get finished? And that's partially based on a road right by me. It's this thing called Transmission Gully that was supposed to open like nearly 2 years ago, I think, and it's still not open, and they just keep pouring more and more money into it, and they're like, Transmission Gully will be open next year, and I'm like, oh, cool. And, it's a massive piece of work, and it just seems to be taking forever, and that card just literally inspired the idea of, what about having a line of communication? What about having one of these fast maglev lines? It's just not finished. It's mostly done, but they've still got to finish it off and do the grand opening. And of course, if you do the grand opening and it works, that pays off really well for the Martian provisional government and the coin. They get economic boosts from connecting these two cities, and they also get fast troop movement between the two. And of course, the rebels can permanently shut it down, so it just doesn't work at all for the rest of the game. Next, we have one of the few space cards, and that's Satellite Network Upgraded. Now, Space Domain or Space Conflict is one of the new aspects for Red Dust Rebellion that's not in any of the coin games. We're not doing satellite-on-satellite warfare because, the rebels, they can't really afford their own satellite systems. They can hack into the others and they can use them at different times, but really the satellites are controlled by, the government and the corporations. And some of the things with satellites is they can be used to do drop pod attacks. So you can have troops that just fire from orbit and, land on a location. They are equipped with missiles and railguns, so they can do bombardment. Bombardment of domes is, a war crime, so that will have consequences. But if there are rebel forces that are detected out in the deserts, Yeah, well, they can be hit by railguns from space. We wanted to make the satellites like a sword of Damocles. So if someone places a satellite marker in a region, you're like, ooh, that's going to get used for something at some point. Either I spend the time, finding a surface-to-space missile to take it out, or I deal with the consequences later down the road. And this card represents the corporations upgrading that network, the Martian Visual Government as well, upgrading that network to make it more effective. Or it represents the rebels hacking and compromising that network. And I really wanted the satellite to look like this snake dagger pointed right down to the planet, just sort of ominously standing there, just ready to go bam down and just blow something up. And the last card in this set of 16, and remember we've got 48 cards to do, but we're only doing the first 16 in this video. The last card here is the tubes. Now Mars is riddled with lava tubes, and a lot of the settlements in Red Dust Rebellion are built into these lava tubes. They're like big open tunnels that, basically you can move in and you can seal up and you can make them livable a lot easier than if you had to bore into the rock yourself from scratch. But these lava tubes also just wind their way through various parts of the planet, and not all of them are monitored very well. So it's a way for forces to move back and forth between locations unseen, especially if there's satellite surveillance going on overhead. And I wanted this picture to show the menace of troops moving through one of these lava tunnels, quietly, patiently stalking through the tunnels to reach an ambush spot, ready to attack. And, whoever's there is just going to be completely caught by surprise because there are people popping up from an unexpected corner. And this is another one of my favorite pictures in this set because I think it's posed really well. I think there's a right amount of menace here. And it just feels like these guys are about to go do something nasty, but that they've just spotted something up ahead. Alright, so that's the end of the video. That was just a quick overview of the first 16 bits of art. I hope you found that interesting, and I hope you learned a little bit more about the setting of Red Dust Rebellion. I'm going to do another 2 of these videos as the art comes in. So by the time the game's ready to go out, you should have 3 of these videos that will tell you a little bit about the setting and background and just showcase the wonderful art that Marcos has done. And really, go check out his DeviantArt page. His stuff's really good. Picture behind me, link in the description below. It's top-notch stuff, and yeah, I'm really, 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 really glad that we're working with him because it's been freaking amazing seeing that art come in, and it's really hard to describe just how fulfilling or rewarding or just emotional you get when you see a note you've sent or an idea you've had in your head and you pass it off to an artist, and then they take it and they just elevate it and they make it sing and they make it hum, and you just like get these new bits of art and you're like, wow. It's an absolutely special feeling, and hopefully I haven't rambled too much in this video. I get really excited talking about Red Dust, in case you hadn't noticed. I'm also a little sleep deprived because we have a newborn baby, and she's been keeping me awake quite a bit. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, hit the notification button, subscribe to the channel, come support us on Patreon, and go check out Red Dust Rebellion on the GMT page. There's links and stuff below. And until next time, take care and free Mars.